Well, Sooner fans, at least we know that Oklahoma has its place at the big boy table all set. So no issues there. While the rest of college football uh, landscape is shaken, Oklahoma marches on toward the 2022 season and in the SEC in 2025 or sooner. Welcome to the Voice of College Football and our OU show that we bring you each and every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 where it counts. And of course, here's the guy that makes it all happen. Jason Ray, last word on college football. Jason, how's it going?
Doing good, Mark. We're officially in the last month before college football begins again. So it's mostly obviously recruiting, but there's a lot of news going on as you mentioned, and then we've got media days coming up. So it's getting close.
It sure is. I know media days in the SEC, and they're typically the first ones to launch, start 2 weeks. It must be about 10 days from right now. It's going to be about a week from Monday. So we sit here on a Friday going into the weekend, Monday the 3rd, take it into the next weekend. I shouldn't even have started on all that because I've lost track of weeks and days with everything else going on. But it's around the 15th, something in that range. And then everybody else chimes in. I don't know when the Big 12 starts.
Yeah, I didn't know either. I'm just googling right here. It looks like July 13th and 14th.
Oh, the Big 12 might be first.
Yeah, it looks like. I'm just making sure that this is. Yeah, it does. It looks like. Yeah, to your point, last year it was a little bit before earlier, but now it looks like it's yeah, on 13th and 14th.
Okay. July 13th. That's a Wednesday, correct?
Yeah, Wednesday and Thursday it looks
Okay.
like. Yeah.
All right. All right. We'll be looking forward to that. In the meantime, everyone, comments, questions in the live chat. As usual, you ultimately produce the show, but we've got plenty to talk about, so we'll get right to it, starting with 2 commits coming in. And keep in mind that a little bit later in the show, we're going to be reviewing running backs. We ran through the quarterback position last week, and we're going to go position by position today. Running backs, there's a poll on Twitter, on Jason's Twitter page. So please check that out. And unfortunately, I don't have your Twitter here. It's what is your Twitter handle?
It's at Jason Ray 1.
There it is, at Jason Ray 1, and I will correct that banner, and we'll have Jason's Twitter on there all the time so you can find him and follow him there. And I'm also going to leave that poll here on the community page on the YouTube Oklahoma channel right here, and you guys dive in and let us know what you think. All right, let's get to the commits, though. Samuel Omosigo. Are we going to go with Omosigo, 35th rated linebacker in the country, top 70 player in the state of Texas, number 412 according to the 247 Sports Composite. So he commits this week.
Yeah, no, I think that was a big one. He's a kid, Mark, that I think a lot of folks expected. It's been kind of trending Oklahoma's way for a couple of weeks, and so not a huge surprise with that commitment that landed yesterday. And to your point, at top 35 40 linebacker in the country. He is a 3-star 247. I think, and a couple of other publications have him as a 4-star. So he's really kind of teetering on the side of either one of those. So I think there's still a lot. There's still a lot of 3-star fatigue from Oklahoma fans, but I think, and we'll get into this a little bit, but I think July is going to be a month where a lot of people will, if they're frustrated or whatever it might be with the 3-star, maybe just commitments in general or class rankings, I think it'll start picking up a little bit.
So that's one commit coming in, and again, Mosigo ranking in the top 35 at linebacker, top 70 player in the state of Texas. And as Jason mentioned, we'll see what happens with his ranking. Not that it matters once he steps on campus, but he's got a full college season or high school season left to go to do something about that ranking. We also have an offensive tackle coming in and another name up to interpretation here. Heath Ozeta, possibly committing to Oklahoma, and he comes out of Washington.
Yeah, that was it's kind of interesting having this kid commit to Oklahoma, Mark. Just in the fact that it's not a usual place where where Oklahoma goes and gets a lot of kids. So in that from the that area in the kind of the Pacific Northwest area, a guy that was I think previously in it looked like Washington would be a big player for him, but has not didn't pan out to be, and then so Oklahoma grabbed him. I think it was. I'm trying to remember, maybe late last week, early this week as well. So, yeah, another maybe diamond in the rough type of kid, another 3-star, but he's a top 50 tackle, in the country. So he's a guy that has certainly bolstered that offensive line class. There'll be some more. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I think he's the second or the third offensive lineman in this class thus far.
So he's a 42nd ranked offensive tackle, according to the composite, roughly top 500 player, again, out of the state of Washington as one of their top players in the 23 class. We invite everyone in, of course. Appreciate you being here. Dion, Aaron, and others, leave your comments and questions there in the chat. We will get to them. Much happening around college football. And do we go to the running back rundown?
Yeah, just before we get there, just a couple of things on the recruiting side. So, again, I know there was a comment in here, but the Elite 11 camp was just completed, and Oklahoma signee Jackson Arnold was voted as Elite 11 MVP. So again, I think just in that tradition of Oklahoma having kids at the quarterback position that perform really well, highly recruited. Again, Arnold is a kid that was a 4-star, has been elevated to a 5-star, and then I think he could be he'll be a good. I think he'll be a good one. But yeah, just seeing that was in the news a couple of days ago, him winning the MVP of that camp. And then just a couple more recruits that could, from everything that I'm hearing, Mark, Oklahoma could have in the neighborhood of 5 to as much as 8 or 9 commitments commitments for this class in the month of July through that dead period. So a few to keep an eye on. We've talked a little bit about Caden Green, offensive lineman out of Missouri, Lee Summit, Missouri, who's a guy that has been trending to Oklahoma for a while. Took a visit to Missouri last week. Was, according to him, one of his better visits. Still think, maybe it puts a little bit of a wrench into that, but still think he's very, very, very pro Oklahoma. And I think Oklahoma still gets his pledge. He will commit as of right now, unless something changes, July 8th. So next Friday, he will make his commitment to either Oklahoma or Missouri, or I think Nebraska is another team that's in the mix. But a couple of other offensive guys that, honestly, Mark, the way it's trending, would not be surprised if it happened this weekend, but certainly, in the early parts of July. So Jaquazi Pedaway, 4-star wide receiver, number 8 ranked wide receiver in the country, top 50 overall, is a guy that is trending very, very highly for Oklahoma. And then Dalen Smothers is another kid. He's a running back, 4-star, 9th ranked overall running back in the country from Charlotte, North Carolina. So I think both of those kids are somebody that are a couple of kids that you'll see, if not this weekend, pretty soon in the early month of July.
Yeah, Smothers is a guy that we talked about on our Florida State show. The crystal ball is directed toward Oklahoma, but Florida State's right there, and they are getting a few crystal ball indicators as well. You got to think that Brent Venables, well, being the name that he is and having been in the game at an elite level for as long as he has, I'm sure he has connections all over the country, but the North Carolina connection to Oklahoma wouldn't necessarily have been frequent in the past, but you got to think that on that side of the country that he continues to have his connections there as well. All right, talking up Sooners here on the Voice of College Football. We do it every Friday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. where it counts. Leave your comments and questions there in the live chat. Jason ran down, and I added my 2 cents on the quarterback room last week. Please check out that video if you were not here. And we're going to go position by position as we head toward August camp. And now let's check in on the running backs with one experienced guy coming back in Eric Gray. Of course, Marcus Major has been on campus forever, has had limited time due to issues on and off the field. And then two complete studs, top 10 running backs in the nation, coming into the program this season as well.
Yeah, Mark, it's really kind of a 180 from where we were last year, kind of talking about this team. At this around about this time last year, Oklahoma dismissed a couple of their running backs coming into that 2021 season, and so and then with with Marcus Major being academically ineligible early on, Oklahoma only had two scholarship running backs, and then just had a couple of walk-ons behind them. Now Oklahoma's in a much better situation than what they were last year. And so, as you mentioned, I think the guy, at least to begin the year, or at least to begin the fall camp as your leader in terms of the running back RB1, is probably Eric Gray. You'd mentioned him a little bit. Split time with Kennedy Brooks last year. Eric Gray was a starter early on. Kennedy Brooks, as he just kind of getting back from that year off from COVID, was still kind of getting into the swing of things a little bit early on, and then certainly became more of the lead running back last year. But Eric Gray, as you have it here on the screen, over 400 yards rushing, a little bit over 200 yards from the receiving side of things. I think that he will. I think he'll be utilized a lot different, Mark, than what he was last year. More of a receiving threat. Probably, certainly, he's the best receiving running back Oklahoma has on this team. So, would not be surprised at all to see him catch anywhere from 30 to 40 balls out of the backfield. Still, certainly, is probably the best running back, but still has that dual purpose that a couple of them don't. And then talked a lot about Marcus Major. Marcus Major is a guy that he's been here a while, hasn't put up a ton of numbers, but he's a guy that's been at Oklahoma for a while. So I think it's kind of his time. He's had some situations where he's been stuck behind a couple of other guys. He had the situation last year where he was academically ineligible for the first part of the year. Never really kind of got back into the swing of things. Last year, over the last few games, played sparingly, but he's a guy that it's going to be a really, really big year for him. Everything I heard through the spring, he was very rejuvenated, just with the new staff and with the new culture and everything that's kind of going on. And so, and he's a kid that was banged up a little bit in spring, so really, really big fall camp for him to be in that mix. And so then you'd mentioned certainly the two stud freshmen that Oklahoma has, both top 10 running backs overall in that 2022 cycle. Starting with Javonte Barnes, he was a kid that was here in the spring for Oklahoma, which you can't oversell the value of how big it is to have some of these true freshmen in the spring. Played pretty well in the spring game, 17 carries for 60 yards, a couple of touchdowns in that game. So he's going to be a guy that's also in the mix. And then, go to Gavin Sawchuk for him. He's a kid that wasn't here in the spring, so he's a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of that, just in terms of knowing the offense and getting in the conditioning, strength and conditioning program, although he's well into it right now, I'm sure. But, just not getting that time, you would think that he's, maybe a little bit behind some of the others right there. But then but again, as you mentioned, top 10 running back, number one player out of the state of Colorado, coming in very, very highly recruited, and that, which was another big get for, for Oklahoma and DeMarco Murray. And then a couple other kids that, you've got Todd Hudson and Jaden Knowles, who were, have been walk-ons for a while, but you've got a couple of other kids that have came into the program that are, one is a junior college transfer, Tyree Walker, played at Palomar College in California at the junior college level. Had 875 yards and 8 touchdowns last year, was here in the spring. Had a pretty good spring game, Mark, at 13 carries, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Did have a fumble as well, so ball security is something probably coming out of that game that was really certainly a focus for him as well. And then another one, which happened fairly late in the cycle here, Mark. Bentavious Thompson, transfer from UCF. I think he goes by Bino Thompson. Played 3 years. UCF, had a little bit over 1,100 yards, 13 touchdowns, and I think probably his best season. And really, he has a lot of familiarity in playing with Dylan Gabriel. A lot of familiarity with Levy's offense while he was at UCF as the backup running back. Ran for 604 yards. And scored 8 touchdowns in that season. So I think the interesting thing is both of those kids, Walker and Thompson, are coming to Oklahoma as walk-ons, at least initially. So they're not scholarship players, but both of them have a lot of experience. So you've got, Mark, you've got about 6 guys here that have, a lot of experience. No, not necessarily at Oklahoma, but they do have a lot of experience in playing, certainly at the college level. So I think it'll be interesting looking at this. You probably have, I would say right now, Mark, as it looks, not sure, what Bino Thompson brings to the table. Not sure necessarily what Gavin Sawchuk will bring to the table this year. But you've got 4 or 5 guys in Eric Gray, Javante Barnes, Marcus Major, Tyree Walker, and then Thompson that figured to be in the mix. And I think it's one of the things that certainly, I think, coming from Oklahoma's offense in the past, they didn't necessarily use a ton of running backs. They would they would have different kids that would play, but it would end up being a couple, and then they would go really kind of move to the hot hand. Levy rolls in a lot of running backs. I mean, you see, I think it's in here in the chat as well, but 3 kids from Ole Miss last year had over 100 carries, and then you had, I think, five kids that had over 50 carries on the season. So a lot of these kids will get opportunities, to carry the rock for Oklahoma. So I think, obviously coming into where we are right now, July 1st, it's a much better situation for Oklahoma at the running back position overall.
Yeah, Jason, as you alluded to just a second ago, Dion has posted on the screen there in Jeff Levy's 2021 Ole Miss offense. Consider 13 games played. All 3 running backs played in all 13 games. And when you've got a running back in Jerrion Ely with 133 attempts to lead the team, that's only 10 per game. Snoop Connor, 130. That's 10 per game. And Reed Parrish with 105. That's roughly 8 or 9 per game. So that really was a balanced distribution there. So that could be based on philosophy, or that could be based on, we've got 3 players and they're all about the same. Nobody's better than anyone else, so I'm going to work them all in. Or it could be a combination of the two in that particular instance. Jason, got a question for you concerning Kennedy Brooks. We posted his numbers. He had a tremendous career at Oklahoma. Then once you transitioned watching him to Eric Gray, you talked about Gray's receiving skills out of the backfield, but as runners, did you see any noticeable difference in quality between the two?
I think they just have a really different running styles, Mark. When you look at Kennedy Brooks, he's much more patient. He very clearly looks for, he's looking for the hole, and I think where Eric Gray was a little bit, he's really kind of a one cut get it and go. And I think he learned a little bit as the season went on. And specifically, I don't. It just seemed a little like last year, Mark, that Eric Gray and Lincoln Riley's philosophy in terms of some of the running designs and running plays that they ran was really more suited for a guy like Kennedy Brooks versus a guy like Eric Gray. And so and I think the other thing, Mark, which was I don't know how you say unfortunate, maybe bad luck. Eric Gray had an opportunity for a few long runs, and he got, he just got tripped up, and so I think one of the things for him is just got to find a way to keep his feet maybe a little bit better this year. But I think this mid-zone attack, running attack that Levy that Levy likes to run is probably a little bit more towards a lot of these running back style. Not only Eric Gray, but specifically Marcus Major, as well as more of kind of a downhill power running type of kid. So, yeah, I think the funny thing about Kennedy Brooks, and heard this in terms of running backs, not a ton of athletic ability, not a ton of not a guy that's going to wow you in the weight room, but he was a guy through his career averaged more than 6 yards per carry overall, for his career. And again, last year was, I think, around 6.2 yards per carry. So, whatever the struggles were on the offensive line, his patience and his, just the ability to know where that hole is going to open up at was really kind of a difference maker. But you would expect, hopefully, just from a year of maturation and just understanding maybe things a little bit better that Eric Gray would get, would be a little bit more, would be a little bit better, a bigger contributor this year. And I think the other thing that Levy does a really good job at is, and obviously every coach does that, but it tries to do that. But he has talked about at length about putting some of his running backs and his kids in a better position to be successful, to be able to give them more weapons on the field. So don't be at all surprised to see a fair amount of time Eric Gray split out wide with either Marcus Major, Javante Barnes, or whoever is in at the running back position, and look to get Eric Gray out in space much more than he was last year, and more and kind of away from between the tackles running, because we've got a couple of other kids that maybe specialize a little bit more, and just getting Gray out in space more.
I'm enjoying the back and forth in the live chat concerning whether it's broadcasters, podcasters, whatever you want to say, and their propensity to curse or not curse. So Charles is appreciative that we don't curse here. Thank you, Charles. I don't have an issue with I've got certain contributors who do curse from time to time. I don't reprimand them, don't have an issue with it. I don't do that. Not that I've never cursed on any podcast ever, or any video. I have once in a while, but it's not just my general mode of talking. But has a curse word ever come out of my mouth? Yes, but I'm not super strict here. But at the same time, I am strict to the point that I have told a number of contributors that we don't tolerate obscenities flowing, every sentence. But so Charles, thank you for that. So let's move it on to the conversation. And again, I will post Jason's Twitter handle. There, we've got that straight. We should have that up there all the time, and will in the future. So you can follow Jason on Twitter, Jason Ray 1. There it is. Go to his Twitter page. You can find the question, who's going to lead Oklahoma in rushing this year? You can make your selection right there. I've also just posted it on the community page right here at YouTube, and we will track and announce the results next week. All right. How did USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten hit you yesterday? I will make one comment before I let you cut loose, because, folks, you can hear me talk about it for 2 to 3 hours with a lot of great contributors yesterday. We did a live stream and had tremendous feedback, of course. So thank you for that. And I also posted a video this morning with what I think Notre Dame should do. But I got to say that when Oklahoma and Texas left for the SEC, that was one of the rumors that was out there that years ago I would have dismissed as ridiculous. But considering what happened with Oklahoma and Texas, not that that's not more of a normal geographic connection, but I didn't dismiss USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten. But then, of course, the talk died for a year. But then, boom, we get hit with it. And the other thing that I find interesting, not concerning the actual logistics of everything happening in college football, but the coverage of it, is that it appears just like with Oklahoma and Texas, there was no one that had a clue that this was going to happen. This was airtight as well.
Yeah, Mark. Just, I mean, so many. I mean, like you, I'm sure. Yesterday and even today, so many thoughts. I think initially the geographic side of it is funny. I've seen the graphics several times, where, and I think, I know that you had Tony Siracusa on here yesterday that talked a little bit about this, and I think he made a good point. When you think about this outside of football, like, can some of these smaller sports survive that amount of travel? Which is very interesting. But it's kind of funny when you think of and I think USC and UCLA, you probably don't ever think about them in terms of their fan support, as much as you would some other schools. But when you think about some of how impactful this is, and some of those fans being able to follow their team and get to some of these places, it's just like, it's astronomical. I think the closest, if I remember seeing this right, I think Lincoln is the closest in proximity to Los Angeles, and
Yeah,
even
I think that's pretty apparent, pretty obvious by looking at a map. Yeah, it would be Lincoln.
And then thinking of a USC Rutgers game, I mean, how big of an impact is that to those kids that have to? I mean, and some of them are maybe used to it to a certain degree, but you're going literally across the United States for a for a football game, and so, but yeah, I mean, I think nothing really surprises me anymore, Mark. I think when everything hope the one thing that does surprise me a little bit, I guess, and through this whole thing, is how the Pac-12 athletic directors, presidents, and then obviously the president of the commissioner of the Pac-12 overall, how they were completely blindsided. It's hard to see how that can happen after everything that happened with Oklahoma and Texas. You would think a lot of these, these guys were on super high alert for something like this to happen, but credit that credit USC and UCLA for keeping this tight-lipped, very much like Oklahoma and Texas has done. And so I think with we saw this coming last year, Mark, and now it's inevitable that we're in the middle of a very, like it or not, seismic shift in college football, where I've watched a lot of feedback here in my office here last night and even this morning about, okay, what does this mean overall for college football? I think a lot of people are pointing to 4 mega conferences. Some people are now saying probably 2. It could be as little as 2 big mega conferences. I think Herb Street was on talking about that a little bit this morning, just in terms of what he thought that would be very, very similar to the NFL, where you have AFC and NFC, and then you have certain divisions, obviously, within the AFC and NFC. So yeah, Mark, just a lot of those thoughts. I mean, I think it's where we're headed. I don't know if it's the best thing for the sport overall. When you think about, it's just odd. I mean, when you think about UCLA and USC in the Big Ten conference, I mean, I think it's just strange to get your head around it. I mean, I think Oklahoma and Texas makes a little bit more sense. Even regionally, you've got Texas A&M, you've got Missouri, you've got Arkansas, you've got LSU, you've got the Mississippi schools. I mean, it's fairly, even from a geography perspective, but geography wise, this makes absolutely no sense. But at the same time, I think we see and we know here what is what's the order of the day, and that's the financial impact that this makes for them. I saw a tweet yesterday, and these are very about the amount of money that Northwestern and the Big Ten and the amount of money that Vanderbilt make in the SEC. I think it was around this past year. I think it was around $80 million for those two schools. Northwestern, I know they've been super relevant in the college football world here over the last, 10, 15 years, but historically, not a blue blood, historically not a great football program. Vanderbilt's even worse, bottom feeder in the SEC for years and years and years and years. Yet both of those teams are bringing in $80 million, and USC and UCLA are around the $30 million range. I mean, from that, probably, I think, as a president and as an owner, certainly an owner of the organization, so to speak, you think of that, and that's like, okay, it's a no brainer, right? I have the opportunity to make to not only double, but almost triple the amount of money that I'm making. It's probably it's an easy decision. So, and it's I mean, to your point about Notre Dame, it's not over. It's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of dominoes to fall, and Notre Dame's not in anywhere near as good of a position being an independent today on July 1st, 2022, than they were, 3-4 years ago. I know that and I don't know the details around this, Mark, maybe you do, but I know they have a ridiculous contract with NBC, so I know they get paid tons of money for that television contract, but they're still probably missing out on some. So, so I think for overall, Mark, with knowing that USC and UCLA are going to the Big Ten in 2024, I think now it could happen sooner for Oklahoma and Texas. I think 2024 is the year where all of these things probably converge and happen, fairly simultaneously. I know that, it's a year. The Big 12 is a year behind that. You got some of those teams coming in next season, 2023. But I think by and large, the seismic move is what happens in 2024. So now, for me, the thought is, what happens to these other conferences? It's and listening to a lot of what Tony had mentioned, it's hard to foresee a sustainable, very much like we talked about with the Big 12. Um, it's very difficult to see a sustaining Pac-12 without the Los Angeles market. Now, certainly they could make some moves, and so now I think it's which one of these conferences is most aggressive. I think it was Paul Feinbaum this morning talking about there's all these athletic directors across the country are quite literally scrambling right now in order to secure their future, and I thought that was very interestingly put, just in terms of securing your future, because whether it's two or whether it's four, I think we are headed for the mega conference. I think we are headed for a certain degree of these teams breaking off from the NCAA, and so, and maybe that's a little bit farther from a long game perspective than 2024. But I think it happens. So what does some of these other teams and conferences do? Is how big of a player can the Big 12 be? How big of a player can the Pac-12 be when you look at least the Big 10 and the SEC is sort of put their foot in the ground and stated, okay, we're the two mega conferences right now. Everybody else has to start catching up. So when you look at Notre Dame, you look at teams like Clemson and Florida State from the ACC. I think we saw rumors last year that they had maybe some mutual interest in the SEC. So I think it's just going to be so interesting to see what the continued dominoes or fallout is from this.
So when people see USC and UCLA games on television and see empty seats all over the place, there is common thought that the Los Angeles market is a pro market, and USC and UCLA don't captivate the market like Norman, Oklahoma, Columbus, Ohio, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, etc. And there's a lot of truth to that. I also think, though, that yes, you need to have winning teams in a market like that, number one. And when USC was thriving under Pete Carroll, we saw the stadium generally packed. I also think that the level of opponent means a lot to those people. And if you take USC and UCLA off the board in the Pac-12 in terms of looking at prestigious opponents for them to play in the Pac-12, who is it? Oregon? That's kind of it. No disrespect to Utah. They don't really push the needle in terms of prestige. They're really good, and Washington's been good. But again, do they really? I got to think that a lot of people in Los Angeles that are not diehard, but fringe USC, UCLA fans are going to be more excited about USC and UCLA playing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, etc. Also, the Pac-12, the Big 12 had more options. So they went and got the four best schools I thought that they could possibly, unless they were going to pull from other conferences, which nobody was going to leave the Big 10 or the SEC for the Big 12. So where were they going to go? Well, they went to the four strongest programs in the group of five level. The Pac-12, though, immediately we get the news upon the USC UCLA move to the Big Ten becoming official that Oregon and Washington have applied for the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
So if those two leave, the Pac-12, I would think, is either going to dissolve or what's left of it's going to have to grab onto teams in the Mountain West and try to pull Boise State and San Diego State and some of the better programs out of the Mountain West. And then I don't think their prospects of maintaining Power 5 status or anything close to what the Big 12's been able to maintain. And that's even in question because they're not going to be able to pull anything close to the likes of Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston out of the Mountain West. It's just not there from the size markets to the level of play on the field or anything. So the Pac-12's in real trouble. In terms of the travel, Jason, the thing I'll say about that is from a football standpoint, it's a burden on these athletes, but I think about all the other sports. Like if you're a baseball or a softball player, it's one thing to have to, if you're a USC football player and you're going to play half your games on the road, so you're going to play 4 to 5 conference games on the road. So you're going to have to travel a long ways, 4 or 5 times. If you're a baseball player, a softball player, the entire conference, it's not like it's this conference that's all over the place like Conference USA used to be. It's everybody in the conference other than one team is all the way across the country. Mm-hmm. So what do you do? I got to think that if you're a baseball or softball player and the other sports included, soccer player, like the scheduling nightmare for this conference is going to be, what do you do? If you have a series with Rutgers, do you then stick around and have a series with Penn State and a series with Maryland? And then If you're a USC or UCLA athlete and you're spending a month at a time on the road, you're probably thinking, why did I enroll at USC if I'm not spending any time here? I got to be on the road for 6 weeks at a time to take the road tour around the eastern half of the country. It's just a lot, to deal with, as opposed to your point, the SEC. It can be divided into regions. And sure, Missouri's got to take its trip to South Carolina and Texas to South Carolina. And that's one trip about halfway across the country. But otherwise, you can keep them in pods. And you've got like a satellite way over on the other side of the country. Crazy.
Yeah, no, it is crazy, and I think to your point about that, and I believe it was Tony that was talking about this. He'd mentioned exactly what you mentioned. How is that sustainable for those, if you want to call it Olympic sports, or softball, baseball, things like that? How is that possibly sustainable for those sports and those, and I think someone alluded to the fact that it's a little bit easier on the college football side of it because they probably can charter some of these flights a little bit, and things like that. um, but you're looking at some of these softball, baseball teams that are going to have to are they going to have to bus halfway, not even halfway across the country, all the way across the country. So I think there were some thoughts that maybe the Pac-12 can stay somewhat relevant as a conference overall and still kind of maintain those other sports in that capacity. I think the only caveat to this is per your last point around Oregon and Washington. I mean, I think that reprieves it maybe a little bit, helps things a little bit, in terms of maybe if you're UCLA or USC, that you play those two teams, so you don't have to make as many road trips across the country. But still, having said that, I think there's a lot of things that need to be ironed out and worked out as far as that goes, because to your point, it's not something that these kids and these teams can pay for.
And Jason, if you pull in those two, Washington, Oregon, then you've got a 16-team conference. Maybe you go to 4-team pods, and you've got those four in their own pod. And then you've got whatever, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, whatever, those four. And then you slice it into 4 regions. And the Big Ten is very regionalized that way. You can almost slice it evenly, especially with those 4 on the West Coast. And you play the majority of your games against your pod. You're going to play the rest of the conference, but it's going to be isolated, a large portion of your schedule to that pod, and maybe that eases those issues.
Yeah.
Let's see, where was that comment? Aaron, I do realize it's about football. Believe me, I understand it's about football and money. Yes, I've been spewing that for years and years and years and years. I'm just talking about how it affects other people. I know what the decision makers are prioritizing. There's no question about that. Jag Sooner, you will be happy to know that Jason will be here after every Oklahoma game this year, analyzing the game and taking your comments and questions. So, yes, Jason will be back for Sooner post game this year.
Yeah, no, excited. Absolutely excited to do that. We'll be good for another year. I'm excited, and I think when we talk about, I mean, it's just kind of struck a chord when you talk about the money situation. I think more so than at any time in collegiate athletics, that money is much more of a determining factor with everything that's going on with NIL, and then certainly this with these super conferences, so to speak. And so yeah, it's definitely a different it's a different game than it used to be. And this is a little bit of a broken record, but on the field, on the court, on the wherever you want to say, and I think this is something that's becoming, it's certainly becoming a trend, obviously, but I think we're losing these rivalries, more and more, which is, I think for a truest of the game, it's unfortunate. I mean, things change. I mean, you're looking at Oklahoma and Oklahoma State probably not having that same game rivalry every single year. Then, with if Oregon and Washington were to make a move to the Big Ten, you've got Oregon and Oregon State, Washington and Washington State games that may or may not happen in the future. And so I think I'm I'm somewhere in the middle here. I mean, I'm considered a millennial, but I'm I'm young enough to um, I'm young enough that I don't mind the change as much from a college football landscape perspective. But I am at almost 41. I'm old enough that still um, holds on to some of those old conferences and things like that, and the things that changed are a little a little disappointing in some ways, but it's the way. I mean, and I think, and I'm certainly curious to your point about are your thoughts on this, Mark. I mean, when you look at whether it's two or whether it's four, mega conferences, and maybe the split away from the NCAA. What does this mean? What does this mean for some of these mid-major teams, non-Power Five conference teams? And we've heard thoughts about them if some of the big boys, so to speak, kind of pull away from the NCAA. Some of the other ones do as well, and sort of having a I don't know. I mean, I know they don't like the most guys don't like the term mid-major, but a non-Power Five or whatever you want to see at national championship and playoff. Do you think that's something that we see as well in the future?
Yeah, I think there's more and more, especially now with NIL, becoming a distinction between the haves and the have-nots is growing larger and larger, even among, depending on your definition of the haves and the have-nots, even among the haves, meaning the Power Five, there's becoming more and more of a distinction, as you outlined a few minutes ago, when the Pac-12 is distributing 30 million per team, and we're looking at in the 70s for the Big Ten, and the SEC now projected into the 90s for them. So I have to think that, yes, there's just going to be a continued growing divide and more focus given to whatever the Power Five turns out to be, the Power Four or the Power Two. And yeah, so somebody had mentioned about Aaron there that the Big 12 and the Pac 12 would merge. Well, the Big 12's in not great shape, but it's in decent shape. It's at least solidified and stabilized by the number of schools that are participating and the decent quality of those schools. But the Pac 12, if anything, I would think if the Big 12 wants to try to continue to keep up to a certain extent, could pick from the Pac 12. The Pac 12, if this Washington Oregon situation goes through, which it seems like that's the writing on the wall, the Pac 12 is done as a Power Five conference. There's no way that they can attract anyone of significance to maintain their status. Who is it?
No, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. There's not a way. I don't see a way that they can maintain with losing someone, two teams with the clout that Oregon and Washington bring to the table. I mean, it would be similar to the fact that, let's say, for example, obviously OU and Texas moved to the SEC. Let's say Oklahoma State and West Virginia, just to throw out a name there, both left the Big 12 at the same time to go to whether it was the SEC or a different conference overall. It would have been very difficult for the Big 12 to sustain themselves at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, you're right, Mark. I mean, I know that you'd mentioned some of those schools out west, whether it's a Boise or a San Diego State or or whatever, that those teams look like. They could put together, still put together a league, but I think they would still need Oregon and Washington to be part of that league to make it viable. So I think that if that happens, and to your point with the writing kind of being on the wall, it looks bleak, for the Pac-12. But on the other side, we sat here last year and thought that there was a good chance that it looked bleak for the Big 12, and they went
Yep.
and got some of the, to your point, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, the best teams that they could probably hoped, to gather. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what they do, here. But I think exactly. I agree with you. If Oregon Washington goes, I think it's not something you can come back from.
So just days after the Big 12 had the Texas Oklahoma news hit them, I posted a video that these are the four to go get: BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. Not that the Big 12 is listening to me, but that's what eventually happened. So I'm going to take a shot at this one. I think Washington and Oregon are going to the Big 10. And I think what would be mutually best for both the Big 12 and for Utah and Colorado is for those two schools to join the Big 12, raise them to 16. They're geographically sound. Not that, again, that matters too much to too many people at this point, but Utah is an extremely strong football program. Colorado is a former member of the Big 12 as of 10 years ago, and I think they build back up to 16.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. I think that's I agree with that. To your point about Colorado, they already are in the league. Previously were in the league, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you can no longer, specifically what happened here, you can no longer think about this, from a geography perspective, right? Like it's no longer what teams fit or what makes sense or anything like that. It's just, kind of survival of the fittest. Like if you want to maintain your legitimacy or even your existence as a conference, specifically as a Power Five conference, um, you've got to be in a position to make these moves, and it's just whoever goes first. And with Oregon and Washington already applying, and then understanding that they're AAU schools as well. You would think that that's something that would, be advantageous for both sides.
Jag Sooner not missing those 12 o'clock noon Eastern time starts or 11 a.m. Central time. Keep in mind that if you flip on ESPN every Saturday during the college football season at noon, 99% of the time it's an SEC game. And because of the depth of the conference, it's usually a pretty good game. It's not like they've got Vanderbilt and Missouri playing at noon on ESPN. No, it's LSU and Ole Miss, or it's Texas A&M and Florida. Those are good games. So Oklahoma is going to get hit with, unless they're playing Alabama, or depending on the structure of the league and who's good that particular year, they're still going to get hit with a few. Maybe not as many without that Fox noon attention given to those games, but they'll get hit with a couple a year. All right.
Yep,
appreciate everybody being here. And was there anything else that you wanted to get to? I don't see any other questions here.
No, I don't think so. I just scrolling. There's a lot of questions about recruiting. So yeah, feel free to go back and watch the video when it releases. But as I mentioned, I think Oklahoma's probably in a position for anywhere from 5 to 8 or 9 commitments. I think within the month of July. Whether not sure when those will be, but I think OU's trending for some for some of those in the month of July. So they're going to come. There could be a couple as early as this weekend, but if not, they'll continue to happen. And then Caden Green, his official announcement is already scheduled. That's going to be July 8th as well. So yeah, I think recruiting is something to keep an eye on, obviously, for the month of July. And then and then August we get into fall camp pretty soon.
Norwooding, that was my suggestion for the ACC. That's about the best I could think of off the top of my head. Notre Dame, West Virginia, possibilities there. Those are possibilities, but I would like to see Notre Dame join the Big Ten myself for a lot of different reasons. But of course, they are in contract with the ACC, and it would take some money to get out. But like somebody asked several people yesterday about USC and UCLA, don't they have contracts with the Pac-12? Aren't they committed to the Pac-12? Yes, but they just buy themselves out, or the Big Ten helps them buy themselves out, and they just kind of slough off the 20 million or whatever they have to pay to get out of their contract and move on. That's how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Jason Ray, last word on college football. Get on over to Jason's Twitter page, and you will see near the top of the page the poll that he just posted about who will lead Oklahoma in rushing. You can vote there. You can vote right here on YouTube as well. Jason, we appreciate you making this happen again for a 65th time. And yes, rest easy, everyone. Jason will be here post-game after every Oklahoma game this season. Jason, have a great weekend.
All right, thanks. You too.
Folks, we will have an Oregon live show, a little special edition coming up at 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific, 5 for you in the Midwest there in Oklahoma. So an Oregon live talking about Oregon's likely move to the Big Ten as well. So we'll see you then, 6 Eastern, Oregon live over on the Oregon channel.